G'day, Richard here. Now, a few in this Thought Leaders community have asked if I would prepare a video to illustrate how I've been integrating the models on a learning map that really helps bring together the dependencies between the models that we develop in our pink sheets, green sheets and the like, to build greater coherence. And greater coherence in our thinking and the way we represent it in models really helps improve our conviction, and we all need that when we get in front of clients, right? So this is a great little piece of homework that you can do as you go through your thinking processes. Well, it's section 3.3 in the Think module, where Matt is talking about creating contextual models, and he talks about a suite of 8 models that can be laid down onto Bernice McCarthy's format learning framework, which covers off the why, what, how and if models. And Matt, in that particular section, talks through the 8 types, right? And I've briefly summarized that here. So if you are here in this, listening to this video, and this overwhelms you immediately, I would encourage you to go back into the curriculum and have another look through Matt's presentation on 3.3, but in particular work through all of the Think modules, all of the Cell modules, because it's how we bring these together that helps build the coherence. And we don't need to use all of them. We can choose one from each of these quadrants, and those are the ones that I'm going to talk to today, are the ones indeed that I've coloured in here. The value ladder for the Y model, the simple matrix for the What model, the very familiar 3 Venn diagram for the How model, and then the simple contrast frame for the If model. And as you see, there are other variations that can be used, and there's no right or wrong way around this. It's really a matter of choice, and these are the 4 that I've chosen to provide an illustration of how these models link together and how you might be able then to use them in modeling your own cluster. Now, you're well aware that that comes as a 3-circle Venn diagram of message market mode, right? And it deals with problems, preferences, prescription, and goodness me, problems, preferences, and perspective, and how in doing that you can organize what you know to take it to people who want what you know in a way that meets their needs and enables you to parse your knowledge in a way that delivers most effectively and creates a wonderful experience for them. So let's come to this thinking about your own cluster that you're running with right now, okay? And in doing that, let's look at how these 4 models and 4 perspectives on your cluster right now may then be integrated to help you see the coherence from the modeling perspective around the cluster, so that hopefully through this exercise you might get greater conviction, deeper conviction in the process of taking that to market. So what I'm going to do without further ado is start with Bernice McCarthy's format learning model. Now, Bernice has the what frame here and the if frame here. And I've changed that just for preferences that I'll come to at the end of the thing, and simply it does not change the model. All I've done is switch the names of these axes, right? And then altered them in that perspective with good reason, because the why and the if deal more with experience, and the what and the how deal more with the conceptual thinking that's at the heart of how we interpret their real world experience and the experience that we want to create in the work that we do with the people that we like. So let's dive into the why model. Always good to start with why, as we remember from Simon Sinek. And the way in which I like to simplify the why model, and I'm using here a ladder model, is to say first, and I often, do this in conversation with the client, but when you get to that point, I will have taken a concept of my own why model in, but sought to use their language as I've heard, and that having got to the point of talking through their particular problem set, the known spoken that they're very much attuned to talking to and open to talking to, one seeks to find out what it is that's known to them but unspoken. For there often we find the deeper issues that if we're to be successful, we have to find some sort of breakthrough in that process. So where I typically start then is to invite them to say, well, look, how are you feeling? What's the state of play in your organization right now? And I invite them to and I find a word, but a word that actually describes the state that they are in. And that might be something like, well, highly competitive or fragmented or something like that. Then I invite them to say, but how does that current state make you feel? And I put that word on this end as well. Then, having talked with them for a little while, I might then ask them where indeed they would prefer to be. What is their aspiration for a more positive state within the business? And ask them to describe that and find a word in that conversation around what their aspiration for the organisation or for themselves, if it's an individual, might be. And indeed, if an earlier word was competitive for the negative, then a positive word might well be collaborative, and seeking that collaborative state amongst their people. And then I indeed ask them, well, how might they feel if that positive state was true? Hey, if that positive state was true. Now, it might be happy, it might be agreeable, whatever it might be. Now, I come to the midpoint and simply ask them, for that change to be true, what of all of the things that you could do to shift from one state to the other, what's the one thing that you absolutely have to break through in this particular organisation? And it might be getting alignment. It might be the difficulty of getting cooperation before you get collaboration. But whatever that word is, that is the neutral state, but the key breakthrough issue that we're seeking to identify here in terms of the breakthrough. And if that were true, then how would that feel itself? And instead of, them feeling somewhere, fractious to happy, it might be that they've actually got a much more supportive environment. Not yet collaborative, but supportive in that sense. So again, you get some sense of, how it would feel to actually get part of the way there. Because with that sort of frame, then one can begin to ask, well, what does it take to actually move from there through the breakthrough? And once you've achieved the breakthrough, to stop it drifting off, what is it that would then shift the organisation or the person up to that positive aspirational state that they're seeking? And that's where you get the opportunity to say what it is that you bring to the table. How are you going to actually shift that organisation or that person through the breakthrough point to achieve their aspirational state? Now, sometimes folks will say to me, but it's hard getting to that point. Well, then one thing that you can do is, getting to the point where they invite you to say, well, how do you move through that state? Is to invite them to say, well, if they stayed here at the negative state, what would that mean for them? And they'll often, say something about, well, crikey, well, we'll have about 2 years of business left or whatever. So it really, possibly points to extinction or something perhaps not quite as severe. But equally, you can create the sense that not only if you are able to achieve your aspirational state, but sustain that aspirational state, how would that make you feel? Right? Really in terms of them being, empowered, that they could be really quite adaptive, not so anxious about the future, and properly engaged with their full workforce. So this is pretty cool, right? And from that conversation around the why, one can then lead to a suggestion of how you might help them move through that state. And they've told you exactly why it is they want to move, both in terms of the state, the conceptual state that they or their organization is in, that they want to improve, and what that would mean for them emotionally, and experientially in terms of shifting them to a far more engaged and positive feeling. So now we move to the how model, because if you remember Simon Sinek and his TED Talk and his golden circles, right? And he had the large circle as the what, the inner circle, the next circle in was the how, and the inner circle was the why. And his point was that many people in the organization know what an organization does. Few know how it does it. And sadly, even fewer know why. And he has, made his dint in the universe with the simple phrase that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And that's why we start with why. In our conception of this frame of models as being super important as to if you get this right, your chances of actually doing well in the market are significantly improved. So let's zoom back out and now zoom into the how. And it's not by chance that I've chosen to work with the with the three-circle Venn diagram, because I was a pure mathematician in my early university days, and this sort of stuff really floats my boat. But importantly, too often debate in society, debate in organizations becomes dichotomous, right? It's really along that line of opposing arguments. But if we can get a trichotomy, such as we're talking about here, then we stand a chance of getting better outcomes. And that's one of the laws of 20 laws of complexity. If you ever want to dig into it, tap me on the shoulder and we'll have a yarn about that someday. So, 3 ways. And what we're looking for, ideally, is something of 2 properties that are sort of aligned, that there's some conjunction to them, and a 3rd property that is orthogonal to those 2. So why is that important? Well, I'm going to zoom back out for the moment and then zoom back into the y, because if you look at this as a straight line, between those 2 points, then on that line there may be 2 issues. Come on, duplicate, thank you. That are in contention in causing the shift. And it might be that the organization or the person is doing too much of one and not enough of the other. And who knows? But those are the sorts of things that are really helpful to dig out. But you will have thought about that as you've gone through the known spoken problems, right? So a lot of the hints for this come in the known spoken. Now, what we're looking for in terms of the orthogonal beast, yes, duplicate, go again. See, it's what is this breakthrough issue that might help us out in really understanding the 3rd leg of the stool, right, in our how model. So let me just now get rid of that, because we're going to go back down to the how model. But there's a relationship between the why and the how, right? Just think about what it is that's causing the shift and what is the breakthrough issue, and that might help you actually land a really ace how model. And you'll come up with 3 things, right? A, B, and C. And you'll have some distinctions around those. And don't underestimate the value of these distinctions. So, one example that, I've earned a lot of money with is that my A was strategy, the B was execution. So you can see the connection between strategy and execution. And too often there's a gap between the 2, but really we know that they need to live dynamically together on that line. And too frequently they don't. And what's the orthogonal issue that people don't deal with very well? Governance. Why? Because it's about control, right? Almost a dirty word. Something that they really know, but don't talk about. They'll talk about empowering people, but they won't have the conversation about power, right? So this is really the important thing of trying to spend a bit of time understanding what's on the line between the 2 aspects of your why model and what that breakthrough issue is. Also spend some time thinking about your distinctions, right? I was at the 2019 International Council for Systems Engineering conference, And Professor Barbara Kellerman from Harvard's Graduate School of Government, the Kennedy School of Government, gave a presentation. And she was talking about leadership as being needed to be a system of leadership. Really super message. But all she talked about was A, B, and C. And I sat there thinking, my God, if only she'd done Thought Leaders Business School. Her talk would have been so much richer for the differentiations that she could provide between her A, B, and C in terms of professionalizing this thing we call leadership. And it's a superb opportunity for everyone in business school to spend their time thinking deeply about our A, B, and C and the distinctions among them. But anyway, there we are. We've got the A, B, and C, and we'll just move those over a little. And now let's think about, because those are the main elements, and there's one other point that I'd like to make about the how model. And it comes to, you know, the beauty of things running in threes. And that is if you are over here in the Y frame and you are talking to people about how they move from where they are to where they aspire to be, and you're going to tell them 3 new things, don't let it be any more than 3 new things, because then you'll be running up against the limitations of the human brain. Without the ability to parse new information, we can only cope with 3 new ideas at once. And that again is the beauty of the how model and the power within it. So anyway, let's move on. Now, let's come back to the what model. And how then do we move to a what model having thought about our how model? Cheers. Right. And I'm starting with the grid, okay? Right. So lo and behold, you've said in your how that there are 3 things to deal with. And in my example, it was strategy, execution, and governance. Well, in whatever is your A, now that's a potentially big topic. Are there 3 things that you, whoops, 2 comes after 1. So 3 things that you can talk about that as a subset of your A. What are the 3 main points that you would make when covering off on the main point that you want to make around A? Similarly, around B, what are the 3 points there? And then again with C. And it could be, in my particular case, as I was looking about the integration of strategy, execution, and governance, that as I thought about these, in increasing degrees of commitment. So what was it that and this is again my example, but you'll have your own, that I needed for awareness, for deeper understanding, and for them to commit. Right? Now you will have your own axis. So, you know, that was mine. I'm going to rub those out, having put them on there just by way of example, because I don't want you to be, you know, too much driven by the way in which I had constructed my own what model for the integration of strategy, execution, and governance. There'll be something that, you know, helps them through a journey better get to grips with strategy, to better get to grips with execution, to understand the interfaces between the two, and then manage a level of control, which was my C, around keeping the whole lot working together, and with appropriate balance between short-term and long-term, etc. But what's your story? What's your A, B, and C from the how model that translate into these subsets that enable you to frame a program? Because then if you did the sum of these things here, if you did the sum of these things here, how well would that help shift people on these journeys here? And maybe there might be a case of you saying, well, actually, we can't do them all at once. Maybe you would see part of it broken down like that, whereby those in yellow become part of this first program and those in orange become part of this program. So it's one way in which you can then relate not only your how model to your what model, but then check back to see whether or not what you're proposing in your program actually aligns with the promise you've just made about not only getting them through the breakthrough issue, but actually getting them up to their aspirational state. Hey? Super. One more model to go. And that's the if model. Now the if model. I think it's probably the least used of all the models I ever see, and I don't know if I've ever had anyone in all the mentoring I've done in thought leaders come and ask me about the if model. And that surprises me a little. What we've got with the if model is potentially the measures of success for what we've just promised, right? And what we've just constructed. Because it begs the question, how do you know? You know why, you know how, you know what. But so what? Will that meet the promise? And here's where you frame the question. If I do this, will I be successful? Now that bears deep thinking. Okay? So, let's have a crack. It's very simply a contrast frame, right? It's simply said. And what we're looking at is a case of what's before. All right, it's not going to straighten up on me. And what's after. I'm going to put a little category at the front because, lo and behold, what we can do is bring across what you said you were going to do, how you were going to address this was with A, B, and C. And that you said that beforehand that there was a case of, you could say, in what state was there A? In what state was there B? In what state was there C? Then you could ask, how did they feel about that? How did they feel about that? How did they feel about that? So there's an understanding in this of before, of their state, and how they felt. And this is, if you've had that conversation around the problem set and in the construction of the why model, you will probably have enough intuitive sense to being able to deduce this. But it's pretty good if you get on contract to have this conversation while you're going through the contract, if there's a contract involved, right? Because this becomes the measures of success by which you determine whether or not you're going to get paid. Now, afterwards, you could then go, well, we sought to shift these things, and what would the aspirational state be? And likewise, with regard to how they're feeling, the degree of engagement, the degree of commitment to strategy, the degree of empowerment that might be around the control issues in that's again coming back to my example, but whatever are your A's, B's and C's. And that then helps you think about whether or not, if you achieve these shifts here, will you satisfactorily create this shift here in the why model? Because your if model helps you think about the things that need to change, both in terms of state and experience and feeling, that help make your why model true. Now, if you've done that homework, before you go into a conversation on your cluster, how much conviction do you think you'd have entering into that conversation? Because what you've got are 4 frames of reference. You understand the interdependencies among them, that if they use a word in the why model, you can get some sense of how what that means for the shift that's required, and the criteria that might apply. You can relate it back to the question as to whether or not what you're proposing in your program would actually achieve that, or whether or not what you've heard from your client might force you to think about, what perspectives from your whole body of knowledge you need to bring into your what model to actually hit the nail on the head for that particular client. And it's all done with love, right? So there we are. That's an integration across the models that I've shown you. There are, of course, many more models that you can choose to use. And I would encourage you, once again, to go back and look through the think and the sell modules. So before we finish up, there's one last thing that this is particularly useful for. You've gotten to this stage where you have your models all mojoed away and laid out on the learning map. Now, pink sheets. If you've got these 4 models, there's quite a number of pink sheets staring you in the face right here. Because if we look at the why model, you've got possibly 13 pink sheets there alone. If we look at the how model, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 as a minimum, plus any other statements that you might make about it as a whole. So 7 plus pink sheets there. In the what model, well, 3 3s are 9, plus the 2 axes, at least 11 pink sheets there. If model, well, what have we got? Depends on how many, at least as many as you've got words against each bullet point here. And in this example, we've got 12, right? Plus some statements about why they're important, about how they relate to the why model. you can add pink sheets again about how the why model relates to the how model. The relationship between the how and the what, between the what and the if, and between the if and the why. And lo and behold, here we get an infinity loop creating. Because it's through this process of pink sheeting this, you'll actually improve this model mojo. This collection, this integration can only evolve for the better in your processing of pink sheeting. So if my arithmetic's right, that's 25 plus 18, at least 43 models, pink sheets from these 4 models. You know, and if we're talking about a folder of 52, well, you've only got to make 7 statements, or 8 statements, 9 statements about the whole in order to get up to your 52. So there's a folder's worth of pink sheets right here. And we all need to do pink sheets. So, wonderful stuff. What I propose to do is take this further and begin to bring to the Thought Leaders community a set of videos that help establish some systems thinking for thought leaders, right? Because there's a lot of power in behind the framework from a systems level and from the design of a systemic interventions that this world so sorely needs. Because I think it's through this process that we really can live up to the promise to show people that no problem is too big for them to act on and leave the world in a better place for what they've done. So there we are. I look forward to any questions. Pop them into the commentary below, and look forward to further conversations with you. That's it for me for now. See you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.